Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Trevor Holmes. If you haven't checked out my stream yet or haven't read my articles, I recently started writing for Modern Nexus. I've written 2 articles so far. The first one was about GP Charlotte and the Grixis control deck that I played to day 2, and then the second article was about Fabrizio Anteri. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He got 13th place at GP Copenhagen with Suicide Zoo, or Super Crazy Zoo, as some people call it. And the deck's a lot of fun. We play it on stream all the time, and I figured we would run it through an 8-man and do a deck take on it to explain some of the finer points and maybe give an overview for those that aren't familiar with how the deck plays, want to see it in action before possibly deciding to buy it for themselves. So let's go for it. First thing is the mana base. 16 lands. We're not playing Verdant Catacombs because we're poor. Fabrizio had Verdant Catacombs, and Verdant Catacombs fetches every shock in the deck, whereas all the ones that we're playing only fetch 4 of the 5. It's not really a problem. There's never been a situation where I wasn't able to fetch the land that I needed and I died because of it. I think you'd be definitely have a little bit more consistency if you were playing a playset of Verdants, but I don't think it's necessary. Definitely, if you if you have extra fetches lying around and you just don't want to shell out for a playset of Verdant Catacombs, don't feel like you need to play the deck. It's not like Twin, where if you don't have Scalding Tarns, you just can't play. But again, yeah, you just have to keep it in mind during the game. Just realize that every fetch you have only fetches 4 of the 5 shocks. The best shock that you want to get on turn 1 is Stomping Ground, followed by Godless Shrine. Stomping Ground plays Curd Ape on turn 1 as a 2/3 on turn 1. So it can like block opposing Goblin Guides, things like that. And then Godless Shrine gets us black for Death Shadow and Thoughtseize, and white mana to pump our Wild Nikotl. White mana isn't super important in this deck. You can play it just as like, you know, a Jund style mana base, just because you only need white in the main deck to pump Wild Nikotl. It's only in the sideboard that we have things like Stony Silence and Leyline of Sanctity. So keep that in mind when you're fetching. That the main lands you're gonna get are Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb, and Stomping Ground, followed by maybe one of these if you have a Wild Nikotl, depending on what you have. But yeah, 1-land hands should rarely ever get Temple Garden or Godless Shrine. You should probably get Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb, or Stomping Ground to help you cast your spells. Moving on, the cantrips. Only thing I'll say about these is that Bauble is the worst cantrip when life doesn't matter, and Street Wraith is the worst cantrip when life does matter. So against Delver decks, I'll normally board out Street Wraiths over Baubles, just because the 2 life is basically like a free turn that we're giving them, and the same for Burn. Street Wraith and Jataxian Probe come out, but if we're shaving cantrips and like we don't really care, like we want to continue to pressure our life total, then Bauble is the one we get rid of. It doesn't cost life to use, which you could say is a good thing, but in our deck it's a bad thing. Things are backwards that way, and you also don't get to draw the card immediately. You draw it next turn. So moving on to the creatures, we have Death Shadow, Curd Ape, Wild Nikotl, Monastery Swiftspear. Fabrizio cut step links for Curd Ape. Somebody in the comments of my article suggested cutting Curd Ape for Goblin Guide. Now that we're playing Curd Ape, the question has to be asked, like, why aren't we playing Goblin Guide? For one, you can get, in exchange for 1 less toughness, you get haste, and I guess the drawback of giving opponents free lands. We don't really care about that in our deck because we're killing them so quickly. They normally die with cards in hand. So it's definitely an interesting point. To raise. For this video, I'm going to play with Curd Ape, and just during the 8-man, you know, we'll just think about what happens, like, if we draw a Curd Ape, would we have rather it been a Goblin Guide, which I'm sure it will happen, that we'll draw a Curd Ape and we'll rather it be a Goblin Guide. Curd Ape is the free option, where Goblin Guide is 8 tickets. It's not really important for people looking for, like, a, you know, make this deck the best it possibly can be for, you know, taking down a PTQ or something, but for somebody that's looking to dip their toes into it, I would definitely say try it with Curd Ape first, and then if you decide that you like the deck a lot and you want to upgrade from there, I think Goblin Guide could be a great addition. I think they're close. I think Goblin Guide is probably slightly better, but I've been winning with Curd Ape, so Vines of Vestwood is great. It's a little awkward as far as we just have to be careful to have enough green. A lot of times we're going to need like 3 green on turn 3 to like become immense, plus we would like to be able to Vines to protect our creature plus kick it. That means normally our land sequencing is going to go like Stomping Ground into possibly like Temple Garden, Overgrown Tomb. Stomping Ground, Godless Shrine for 2, like if we only have 2 lands, that fixes all of our colors and pumps our Wild Nikotl. But if we have an embarrassment of riches as far as lands goes, which happens with our 12 cantrips, then usually fetching like Stomping Ground, then like Overgrown Tomb, then Temple Garden is the way to go if we have Vines in hand. Just something to think about. And then the combo, Temur Battle Rage, Become Immense. The great thing about this deck is it's a combo deck that can just function as like a big creature deck, like Death Shadow, Curd Ape, are bigger, like a lot bigger than, you know, Goblin Guides and things that our opponents are trying to do. Against decks like Jund, we we're not even really going for the combo. We're just trying to play as many powerful 1-drops as we can. That's a great thing about this deck compared to something like Infect. The creatures can be individually strong, and it's not so easily disrupted by things like Malira or Knight of Soul's Betrayal. And then as a, you could say, kind of backup plan, we have this like instant win combo on turn 3, which is excellent. Most of the time I'm killing my opponent with Become Immense, and Temur Battle Rage doesn't even show up. It's just, a hyper efficient, +6/+6 on a Death Shadow or Curd Ape or something to finish off the last few points of damage. But yeah, the combo's still there. It's fun when we pull it off. It's great. Moving on to the sideboard, Stony Silence for Tron, for Affinity. Card's pretty self-explanatory. Affinity can be a pretty tough matchup just because they pressure our life total. They're even more hyper-aggressive and faster than we are. But Stony Silence in combination with Ancient Grudge and Spells Guides to Block Edge champions have proved to be a pretty good way of beating them. We bring in Dismember in that matchup also. Dismember's great against a lot of other creature decks. We want it against Burn. We bring it in against most creature decks. Dismember is interesting in that you would think it's not what you want against Burn, but it's actually fine. Like killing an Eidolon in the Great Revel and letting us drop an early Death Shadow is pretty strong. It's also great against the Grixis control decks and decks that run Tarmogoyf. I tend to bring in Dismember pretty much against everybody except for Tron and Amulet, and like some of the combo decks, like I still bring it in against Storm for Electromancer, but like you wouldn't want it against Living End. Yeah, Dismember's great. Game 1, we're really focused on just being as singularly focused as possible on our game plan, but after board, Dismember is a great answer to like their Tarmogoyfs and stuff. The game's gonna slow down. They're gonna be onto our game plan and have removal for our creatures. So I like having Dismember in those post-board games. Nihil Spellbomb, great against Living End. It's also great against all these Delve strategies. Just being able to exile their graveyard so they can't get extra use out of their Snapcasters on Lightning Bolts and can't cast their gigantic Delve things. Nihil Spellbomb's great. It's cheap. It cycles. So yeah, it's a good card. Leyline of Sanctity is for Burn, which is the deck's worst matchup, which you would say, why are you playing a deck that Burn is its worst matchup online? Burn actually hasn't been showing up that much online. It pops up here and there, but everybody seems to be on these Grixis decks. But yeah, like the Burn matchup it can go either way. Like a lot of times they can, they knock us down to like 8 or something, and then we just like hit back with a huge Death Shadow and they're just dead, and like they can't even race us. And then other games they just kill us, and it seems like nothing we can do can stop it. It really depends on how many Death Shadows we draw. Leyline of Sanctity is excellent. It gives us hexproof. It means all of his lightning bolts and shard volleys and stuff have to be directed at creatures, and then they have to try and win the game on the ground. Whereas like if we can drop a Death Shadow or like a Curd Ape, our guys on the ground, like Wild Nikotl, are bigger than theirs. It's also great against Jund. A lot of people say, why do you bring it in against Jund? It doesn't. So like Jund can have 2 different hands. They can have their fair hands of like Tarmogoyf into Terminate into like Huntmaster of the Fells or whatever, and then they can have their unfair hands, which is like discard into like something else, into like discard into removal spell into Liliana. Those are the hands that we just can't beat, where they just like turn one, take one of our creatures, kill another one of our creatures, or like take a pump spell, take a protection spell, kill a creature, and then like Liliana, and we're just dead. Those are Jund's best draws against us, and Leyline of Sanctity stops their best draws. We can beat their fair draws of like Tarmogoyf into like removal into like expensive thing. We don't care about that. Like if they're playing like Dark Confidant on turn 2, yeah, they're dead. But their best draws are the ones that interact with us and like target us as far as discard and Liliana, and Leyline of Sanctity stops their best draws. So I like bringing in Leyline against Jund. A lot of people always question it. People say, why do you bring in Leyline against Jund? And my reasoning is that like Leyline does nothing against their average draws, but we're able to beat their average draws. Against their best draws, we need something to help us win those games, and Leyline helps us win those games. So if Leyline isn't doing anything in the matchup, it means that their draw was subpar, and we should be winning anyway, so it shouldn't matter. And then after that, Spellskite is just a great all-around answer. Good against Twin, good against, it's just like, you know, randomly awesome. Blocks Edge Champion out of Affinity. There's a cool combo with Spellskite and Death Shadow where you can like crack a fetch and redirect the ability to Spellskite a million times, or enough times to, you know, get ourselves down to like a 1/1 and then hit with a huge Death Shadow. That hasn't really come up that often, but definitely something to keep in mind. But when opponents are trying to like lightning bolt our things and terminate our things, Spellskite is a great option to have, as always. Sometimes it functions as like a Vines of Vastwood that sticks around on the table, and then other times it is great for like holding, you know, blocking our opponent's creatures while we're trying to race. It's good, definitely good. So that's it. We will take it for a spin and see how we do.